I'm a senior vice president. I lead PRA's Center for Rare Diseases. I started our center about 8 years ago, before rare diseases were becoming the sexy hot topic that they are today. And during this time, we've had a lot of great broad exposure to so many different types of programs, trials, registries, natural history studies. I've been personally very focused and very passionate about removing the barriers that we find in clinical development, trying to eliminate and reduce the burdens, and to try to move us, quite frankly, into the 21st century. The way we conduct clinical trials has not evolved much in many decades, and we can do better, and patients can't wait. And we have the ability to leverage both a patient-focused mindset as well as some technology to make this easier for patients. So with that, I'd like to share a couple slides in talking about changing this paradigm. Could we move forward to the next slide, please? Well, as we pull the slides back up, there we go. Thanks so much. So a quick little flow here of what a traditional clinical drug development paradigm looks like. What really is the way we've designed and conducted clinical trials, again, for several decades here. So kind of starting up in the upper left with an approved protocol and going clockwise around this. I like to say sometimes we develop clinical studies in a conference room in New Jersey, right? And it's sometimes very much a bubble that we design studies in that don't often consider a lot of other factors outside of that or the impact on other stakeholders. Once we get a protocol approved, we typically roll this study out to clinical sites and investigators and select them and recruit them and look for them to participate. Once we have sites on board, we move towards this approval process through IRBs and ethics committees that many of you, I'm sure, are painfully aware of. Once approved, we flow into recruiting participants and looking for patients to participate. And then we just continue this flow of data gets entered and reviewed, analyzed, eventually presented and published. And ultimately, when we get to sort of the end of the spectrum or the end of the marathon that Eric referred to, data is filed and registrations are obtained, and we have an approved new therapy. This is kind of the traditional paradigm. This is how it's been for several decades, and there are some issues with this. So what's exactly wrong with this picture of this traditional paradigm? Well, first off, was this protocol designed with input from either site staff or patients? We usually finalize a protocol and then we send it out to clinical sites. They're a key stakeholder in the process, and their ability to conduct the study and just even manage the different assessments and schedule of evaluations, it's critical for sites to have some buy-in and some input into that. This schedule of assessments is often not realistic for patients in terms of what we're asking patients to do in terms of time requirements and schedules. Down below here, do these patients actually exist? And by this, I mean, sometimes we're thinking about a clinical protocol in a bubble sometimes. And when we're thinking about that, we're looking for maybe this ideal profile of a patient. And we're outlining inclusion and exclusion criteria and eligibility criteria for these patients. A lot of times, those criteria and criterion that we line up make it so that these patients we're looking for don't really even exist out there. We're looking for an artificial patient that isn't realistic. We're on the right side, a couple other problems with this traditional paradigm is, does the study even appeal to patients? Are we measuring things that are important to patients? Do we have endpoints selected that are relevant to what a patient or a caregiver is seeing day to day? A lot of times the endpoints themselves are designed for regulators or for drug developers. And if we're looking for someone to participate in a trial, we should be thinking about what's appealing to them. And lastly, how burdensome will participation be? A lot of times the schedule of assessment is this ideal world of all of the different time points and evaluations we want. And we're not necessarily thinking about, is this an option for patients? Are we asking too much of them? So, lastly, the sort of rhetorical question here is, well, why can't we just continue to do things the way we always have? Why do we really have to evolve? I'd like to share just a couple quick metrics that suggests this pattern, this paradigm, this model that we've been stuck in for a few decades really is not working anymore. So on the left side of this slide, you'll see a couple different metrics, and on the right side, the impact of these metrics. And just to quickly highlight a couple, overall, not just rare diseases, but overall in terms of clinical development, we're looking for 40 million patients worldwide to participate in 300,000 clinical trials. Harsha mentioned there's about 2,000 active rare disease studies, but every year we're looking for more and more patients to enroll in more and more trials. The downstream effect of this, 50% of trials are delayed due to recruitment. As you move down kind of the left, some of these other metrics, patient retention is a huge issue. This costs money and takes time. The majority of patients live more than 2 hours from a research site or center, and they are unhappy with the location of the center. As a result, more than 30% of patients drop out before a study ends. And I think we all understand the implications of that if we don't collect enough data or we don't complete enrollment or get enough safety data, studies have to be repeated. And lastly, and maybe really the take-home point here, is that travel to and from a clinical site is the most significant burden for rare disease patients. Via the patient surveys we've conducted, this is the #1 burden. This makes it difficult to participate. This results in delays in enrollment and retention. So the current brick and mortar travel to a clinical site landscape, really the pre-COVID model, has a lot of challenges to it. And these metrics kind of outline and justify why we need to evolve a little bit more. So what do the patients think? So we actually reach out and we speak to patients and we ask patients what they think, which I know, what a crazy novel idea. What are the biggest barriers you faced when participating in a trial? So for those rare disease patients who have actually had the choice and the benefit of being in a trial, the biggest barriers they faced were travel, time commitment, financial strain. It does cost money often to participate in a study. There may be reimbursement involved, but sometimes that can take time to be reimbursed. And families often have to outlay money to sort of participate and handle travel, etc. And there's additional strain on family and caregivers above and beyond the typical strain that is already there baseline for caring for someone with a rare disease. So the flip side of our survey, for those patients who have not participated in a clinical trial, which is the far majority of rare disease patients where there just have not been any studies available, some of the criteria we talked about earlier, eligibility. Patients don't meet this very narrow scope of inclusion-exclusion criteria. Number 2, clinical trial is no longer enrolling. We see biotech and pharma sponsors want to quickly open up a study and enroll it in 6 months and then close it down and analyze the data. We need to allow an opportunity for investigators to communicate that study, for patients to enroll, and the clock is always ticking, but sometimes we need to give patients a little more opportunity. And then, lastly, the trial site was too far away. So again, travel and time being the primary issue here. So this is what patients think. These are the barriers and the hurdles that we see from patients when we speak directly to them and we ask them about their opinion. So moving forward into what is the 21st century now, our paradigm that we've been stuck in really needs to evolve. As Harsha mentioned earlier, this is not all about technology. This is not just a software solution. This is first thinking about patients and really adopting a patient-centric mindset first and foremost. What are we asking of patients? Is this realistic? Is this time frame and schedule of evaluations something that we could do? Could we take time off of work every single week to go to a clinical site? Number 2, moving downward here, involving patients and advocates in the design. Before those studies are finalized, before we have these hurdles to overcome that results in enrollment delays and issues with retention, including patients and advocates and caregivers up front to sort of pressure test, is this realistic for us? Can we handle this? Is this appealing to us? That would be key. That is a new part of the paradigm that needs to be part of our thinking. We still have people we work with that have this mentality of, if you build it, they will come. So, borrowing from the Field of Dreams movie, we have a new therapy. Patients would just be lucky to take our drug. They'd be fortunate to be able to participate in this study. They'll come from wherever they can. Well, patients have uh, patients have choices. Patients have preferences. Patients also have constraints in their life. And this idea of if you build it, they will come needs to be adjusted so that we can actually not make things challenging for patients, but actually design it around patients. So over on the right side here, what are some of the other things we can do? Well, we can leverage technology. And again, I'd like to emphasize it's really about a patient-centric mindset, first and foremost, thinking about patients. But we do have technology at hand that can help bring these studies directly to patients. Decentralized trials is really the wave of the future. We can also learn from other industries. Clinical research, again, has been fairly archaic. And if we look outside into consumer health or technology, we see companies that focus every effort of theirs on their ultimate customer and their ultimate stakeholder. In our case, in clinical research, we don't develop new therapies, we don't advance science without the participation of patients. They are the ultimate stakeholders. I know that I'm probably preaching to the choir with the audience we have here, but we can learn from other industries so that we can always be thinking about human-centric designs and always thinking about patients from the get-go. I'd like to share a little bit of a, one step towards trying to build a solution to overcome these barriers. So the idea of including patients in the design is key. By focusing more on patients, we can improve access, improve enrollment, and improve retention. So we've developed at PRA, with the help of a couple of the attendees, it looks like on this call, a new toolkit, a patient-centric drug development toolkit that is something available for anyone that would like to use it for free. It's valuable to sponsors, to patients and participants, and also to patient advocacy organizations. There's 4 key parts of this toolkit that you can see in the lower left here. We have a patient-centered protocol development tool. We have a patient involvement value case studies, essentially a dossier that shows the ROI of designing studies that are patient focused. So if you have colleagues that don't quite buy into why we should think about patients, at the end of the day, it'll also save them money. So there's an argument to be made for them there. We also have a rapid study burden assessment tool. We also have a guide for sponsors on how to speak with participants, what questions to ask them, and also for participants to ask of sponsors, what are some support options that I could receive? What are some things that I could ask if I'm considering participating in a clinical trial? So we're trying to guide patients and sponsors together to meet in the middle and help us develop something that's patient focused. This is a new patient-centric drug development tool developed by PRA's Center for Rare Diseases, as well as by PRA's Rare Disease Advisory Committee. We'll be releasing this at Rare Disease Day in about 10 days. And again, this is available to anyone who would like to test drive this or try this out. So feel free to reach out to me whenever it's convenient for you. So again, by reducing the burden of clinical trials, by thinking about studies differently, we create greater clinical trial access. The CTTI paper on the left does a great job of outlining some of the impact of this, and again, the ROI. This new paradigm, 21st century thinking, really begins with thinking about patients and then leveraging some technology. And it's really that combination that will allow us to design studies that are suited for patients. It allows us to bring studies to patients in their home. It eliminates their number one burden, which is travel and time. And it also helps us with some other issues. Diversity and access and inclusion in clinical research has been pretty dismal historically. Your typical clinical trial participant looks like me. He's a middle-aged white guy. So by adopting some technology and allowing broader access, we can also access and provide opportunities for patients regardless of ethnicity, gender, sex, geography, whether they're in a rural or an urban setting. So it really democratizes clinical research, which is, of course, better science. It's the right thing to do, and it really brings new therapies to everyone while lowering timelines and costs. So this is the idea, and this is the mindset we want to be moving forward with, is patient-centric, along with leveraging some technology that's been here all along for us to use.